If you've made it this far in the class, that means that you have finished the Scarlet Letter novel, so congratulations to you. Your next step is going to be to take the Scarlet Letter essay test. But before you do that, I'd like to give you a little writing instruction. Now, most of you know that to write a good essay, you should have a good plan. Some people like to dive right in. They just like to read the writing prompt and start writing. But that's never a good idea. That's sort of like building a house without the blueprints. Everyone knows that a house needs a foundation, it needs walls, it needs a roof, and we kind of have an idea of how those things go together. But if you don't have a concrete plan and you try to build a house without it, you are going to run into some trouble. And the same thing goes for an essay. If you want to write a good essay, you have to have a good plan. Sometimes your plan might include an informal outline. Sometimes it might include a formal outline. Whichever the case, a plan will help you prepare to write a very good quality essay. So for our purposes today, I want to talk to you first about an informal outline. For the Scarlet Letter, sometimes people often discuss the idea of whether or not Hester Prynne is heroic. So we're going to use that as the basis of our writing prompt. Let's pretend that you've been asked, is Hester Prynne heroic? And let's say that you believe that she is. Yes, Hester Prynne is heroic. So that would become the basis of your paper, right? Well, if you're going to plan for an essay, you're going to start an informal outline, and you need a thesis. Your thesis statement, and this is the crux here of your thesis statement, not the entirety in your formal paper, but the crux of it. Hester Prynne is heroic. So the answer to the prompt becomes your thesis. All right, see that? Hester Prynne is heroic. All right, so to support this thesis, I need at least 3 main ideas. So any kind of formal paper that you write, whether it be for the EOC essay or any other essay in class, or maybe when you get to college, most of the time a basic essay will include 3 body paragraphs. So that's 5 paragraphs total. We often refer to that as a 3.5. Introduction is your first paragraph, then 3 body paragraphs with 3 main points that support your thesis, and then your conclusion. So 5 paragraphs total. All right, so if we break our essay down into 3 main points, or if we break our informal outline down into 3 main points, our first one might be that Hester cares for and protects her child even though she is a single mother in a Puritan community, right? That can make her heroic. You might disagree, but if you do, that's okay. But for our purposes today, let's just go with this. So Hester cares for and protects her child even though she is a single mother in a Puritan community. So we might argue that's one reason she's heroic. If that's our first body paragraph, we're going to build a paragraph around this idea. We're going to use evidence from the text to support our idea as well. All right, then we might have our second body paragraph centered around the idea that Hester protects herself and cares for the 2 men who, in their own way, deny their relationship with Hester and leave her to suffer on her own. There's our second body paragraph. Our third body paragraph might be about Hester, who protects the townspeople even though they ostracize and mistreat her. So she kind of holds her head up high and she does the right thing even though they all treat her poorly. So these are 3 ideas we could use, even though there are many more. These are 3 ideas we could use to argue that Hester is heroic. See our thesis statement, Hester is heroic, it's stated like a fact, but it's really an arguable statement. People could disagree with it, and they could have valid arguments to why they disagree. So keep that in mind when you're writing about literature. Your points usually are arguable. Okay? All right, so this is our informal outline. If we wanted to turn it into a formal outline, it might look like this. Despite her sin of adultery, Hester Prynne reflects the true characteristics of a heroine. That's a female hero. All right, our first body paragraph, Hester cares for and protects her child even though she is a single mother in a Puritan community. Remember that from our informal outline? So here is the evidence, the 3 main points we're going to use to support our first body paragraph, the point in our first body paragraph. Hester, who believes her husband died at sea, has an affair with Dimmesdale, the Puritan minister. and gives birth to a daughter. So I'm going to write about that. The strict rules of Puritan society concerning adultery and illegitimate children make it difficult for Hester and her daughter to find acceptance from the townspeople. That'll be another point in my paragraph. And then a third point, Hester does not let the townspeople or their judgment of her and her daughter keep her from caring for and loving her daughter. So these are the ideas I will use to support this main point, which in turn supports my thesis. You see how it all goes together like a puzzle? So, to begin with, I had a question. Is Hester heroic? That could have been my prompt. If I said, yes, Hester is heroic, that becomes my thesis, the crux of my thesis. I have to figure out how I'm going to prove my point. How am I going to prove that she is heroic? So then I came up with 3 ideas, 1, 2, 3, that prove or at least support the idea that Hester is heroic. Then I turned around and I took my first main point and I wrote out reasons that support my first main point, that in return supports my thesis. All right, so let's move on. I want to show you, all right, a typical essay for a high school literature class should have at least 5 paragraphs. We've talked about this, sometimes referred to as a 3.5, which includes an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Your formal outline is a roadmap for writing your paper. Sometimes you just want an informal one, though. If it's not going to be picked up and graded, an informal one usually works fine, where you write all messy and you just get your points out there, especially if you're under time constraints, like for the EOC in this essay, which will be time. You don't really need a whole formal outline that's all nice and pretty and put together for a grade. All right, let's break this down. Your introduction. Once you get your outline together, your introduction should catch your reader's attention. That's called the hook. It should include your thesis statement. That may fall anywhere in your introduction, but usually it falls at the end. Your introduction should briefly touch on those main ideas from your outline without specific details. So that would include this information. Your introduction should include a brief reference to the main ideas which will support your thesis, not details that will support each main point. Okay, so it'll include our thesis statement, it'll briefly touch on our main ideas, and it should also include our author's name and the title of the work that you are analyzing. Remember that the first time you mention your author, you should use his or her first and last name. After that, you only have to refer to your author by last name. So the first time I talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne, I'm going to use his full name. After that, I'll just talk about Hawthorne. All right, so let's look at how Susie Sunshine broke down her ideas for this essay. Here was her thesis statement. Remember, she said Hester Prynne is heroic. But look how she kind of turned this around. Despite her sin of adultery, Hester Prynne reflects the true characteristics of a heroine. So she's trying to use some more academic language here. Her planning was very brief, to the point. It wasn't really pretty, and now she's trying to use more academic language. Here are her main points that we talked about already. She cares for her child, she protects the 2 men, and she protects the townspeople. Now look how she turns this into an introduction. Although adultery is still frowned upon by most people, it is more accepted by society than it once was. In fact, the early American colonists considered adultery a crime punishable by death. What? Death? For cheating? There's her hook. Y'all see that? In Nathaniel Hawthorne's early American novel, The Scarlet Letter, the protagonist, notice the academic language here, the protagonist, Hester Prynne, escapes a death sentence, but she still pays a harsh price for her affair with the town's minister. There is the summary, a short summary of the entire book right there. So Susie's given us enough meat in our introduction to give us an idea of the paper, even if we've never read the book. Not only is Hester forced to raise her illegitimate child on her own, but she is also severely persecuted by the townspeople. Furthermore, Hester is forsaken by her husband and her lover, even though she protects each man's position within the town. For these reasons, Hester Prynne, despite her sin of adultery, reflects the true characteristics of a heroine. Notice all of her main points are here, but she did not go and write them word for word. She beefed it up, if you will. She used more academic language there in her introduction. Okay, so now we see that how Susie Sunshine developed her introduction. Now let's look at how she catches her reader's attention with the first two sentences. Although adultery is still frowned upon, we kind of talked about this. I'm not going to go into more detail. She catches her reader's attention. She includes the title of the work and the author's name in her introduction. In Nathaniel Hawthorne's early American novel, The Scarlet Letter, she briefly introduces her main ideas as she leads up to her thesis statement. She concludes her introduction with her thesis. All right, so that's a good introduction. Now, the body paragraph should include the main supporting idea, which supports or proves your thesis, and your subordinate details, evidence that supports the main idea. All right, let's look at the first part of Susie's formal outline. Hester cares for and protects her child even though she is a single mother in a Puritan community. Now remember, here's where we leave off from our introduction. For these reasons, Hester Prynne, despite her sin of adultery, reflects the true characteristics of a heroine. All right, here's where we start the next paragraph. Hester Prynne's affair with the Puritan minister not only marks her as a Scarlet Woman, but the affair also leaves Hester with a daughter to raise single-handedly. Hester names her daughter Pearl, for she claims her child was purchased with all she had, her mother's only treasure. Notice the use of the textual evidence to support her idea. Hester fervently treasures her relationship with her daughter, and she works diligently to care for her child and to protect her from the townspeople's cruelty. When the governor of Boston attempts to take Pearl from Hester, Hester argues that Pearl is a blessing and a curse from God, and she refuses to give her daughter up. Notice a summary here of a big idea in one of the chapters to support her main point. Hester heroically fights to keep her daughter, and she does everything in her power to provide Pearl with the love and attention she needs, especially in a society that shuns her. Notice she has her main idea here. She raises her daughter single-handedly, and then she kind of summarizes it at the end here. All right, finally, let's talk about the conclusion. So Susie would go on to write her other body paragraphs, and then she's going to write her conclusion. She will compose her conclusion by summing up her essay, not the novel itself. Notice how Susie's concluding paragraph restates her thesis and reiterates her main idea without introducing anything new. Even though Hester Prynne commits a terrible sin, she works hard to make up for her wrongdoing. Hester does a remarkable job of loving and caring for her child, and she tries to protect both Dimmesdale and Chillingworth, even though they do nothing to protect or help her. And she benevolently cares for the townspeople of Boston despite their cruel treatment of her and her daughter. Hester's actions more than make up for her sin of adultery, and she truly shows that heroines do not have to be perfect, just human. So a great way to sum up her paper. All right, so this has been a quick tutorial on writing an essay, an academic essay in a literature class. I hope that it helps you. You might want to watch it again before you start your paper for this, your essay test for the Scarlet Letter. Be sure to email your instructor if you have any questions. And I hope you do beautifully on your own paper.